How are folks doing? It's what is it? It's a Wednesday, right? Today, Wednesday at 7 p.m. Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for the organizers, ProductTank, Jerry, Karsh, the whole team. Thank you for inviting me on here. I'm a fan of Mind the Product and this whole community. I've been lucky to meet a few folks in different geographies, and yeah, super excited to be here. And yeah, thanks Vappy for hosting us. This is a sick office. So a little bit about me. My name's Aman. I actually, to kind of zoom out a little bit before we get into evals and what is this term that I keep hearing about and that my CEO is probably telling me, hey, are you guys doing evals? I actually started my career working at a company called Cruise. How many folks remember Cruise in the room? Yeah, RIP, right? So, I actually started there in 2017, 2018 and was working on evals back then. But we didn't call it evals, we just called it testing in QA. And my job was actually to start building data sets that we would use for testing driving behaviors on the car. So anytime we would push changes onto the car, it would go through this series of data sets where we would kind of figure out, oh, are we making the car safer? Are we making the quality of the driving better? And after that, I actually went over to Spotify and worked on the machine learning platform team and worked on recommender systems there. And I was really surprised that we didn't have a tool to do a similar type of observability or evals that we did at Cruise, which was kind of surprising. You would think that, oh, Spotify's been around for a while. We have these ML models, but we don't have any sense of observability. And so I started looking for tools in the space. And that's actually how I came across Arize. So Arize had just raised a Series A. This is almost 4 years ago now. And yeah, the team, Jason, Aparna, and the team were like, hey, why don't you come in and help us build this out? And lo and behold, Spotify is now actually a customer of ours. So, and fun fact, I'm still working on evals, except now for self-driving cars, it's self-driving agents. A lot of companies building agents these days. I actually think evals for agents is actually a harder problem than self-driving for cars, and we can chat more about that too. But just wanted to kind of share this list here. Fun fact, I actually get to work with all of my previous managers in my career because they're all customers of Arize, which is kind of cool and very random. But yeah, we have some amazing customers we get to learn from and build out a suite of tools for observability evals and sort of a platform to help attach all of this together. So actually, just to kick things off a little bit here, I like to show this slide of like, what kind of AI PM are you? Before we get into this though, how many folks are PMs in the room? Okay, what about design? Any designers? Nice, awesome. Product ops, we got any product ops? Okay, anything I didn't say? Okay, what's your? Forward deployed, oh awesome, cool. So I mean the good news is that I've kind of drew this, I've kind of shown this Venn diagram a few times of different types of AI PMs, but I really think it's this visual thing of like rules of three, make it a Venn diagram. I really think that this whole thing is going to start compressing in the next year, and we should really start thinking of ourselves as more like AI product builders. And whether you're using AI and learning about how to use AI more and more in your day job, or you're thinking about what models to use, what models you want to deploy in your company, or you're thinking about evals, it starts to look more and more like you're just thinking about that end user experience. And that's, I think, what fun fact, still what product management is, right? Like we're still thinking about what should be built, who are our customers, and AI is just a tool or just a lens that we can look at this product development sort of lifecycle from. So I like to kind of think of like AI PM as really just product management with AI. Depending on what flavor you're doing, this is going to start collapsing more and more. This is also just a quick like mental map that I have for what the AI PM playbook kind of looks like now. Sorry for the eye test for folks in the back, but it's like, think of this as really a journey that I kind of went on in my own role as a product manager at Arize. So even though we are a platform for AI products and tools, it's not like we just like got here and we're like, all right, we're all AI PMs, let's go build AI products, right? Like we went through this journey of actually trying to use LLMs, see what they're good at, what they're not good at. We tried to build our own workflows and tools sort of around the technology. And that's actually what got us to thinking about, maybe there's a way to evaluate these systems and start building processes, workflows around LLM products themselves. And that's sort of where we're going to be spending a good amount of time is actually in this evals and iteration phase of AI product development. After you get into this stage, there's like production, and then you actually ship, get this out to your end users. But it's sort of this like this journey that we're all kind of going on. Let me kind of zoom out a sec, and this is sort of just meant to show, this is something I think we're all kind of feeling a little bit, which is it's 2025. How many people heard that 2025 was the year of agents? Quick show of hands, yeah? Year of agents. Where are they? Like, can someone point me to like where I can actually use agents aside from like coding agents? Like, I think that's really where I think agents are really finding product market fit is like coding agents. But this really doesn't surprise me that we're coming up on the end of the year. We're sort of in Q4. How many of us are in like annual planning for next year? Maybe we're wrapping up Q4. We're thinking about H1. All of these projects that we decided to greenlight this year, and our exec team or our C-suite is saying, hey, how much money do we actually want to put into AI? We were just having a conversation right before of like, when we think about where our budget for AI goes, is it LLMs? Is it agents? Is it traditional ML? And these are some of the questions that teams are trying to answer, which is what's the impact of this stuff? Who's actually using this bot that we shipped that we have like 20 engineers working on? And that's actually where we kind of help companies sort of answer that question. And this has actually just sort of been an iterative process and not meant to be like, hey, it's just Arize doing this, but more just the fact that what I'm hoping to do today is impart how to think about the metrics for your AI products. So that when you go back to those stakeholders and you're having these discussions around where do we put our dollars next year, you can actually back it up with metrics. And that's sort of what evals are really helpful for, which is being able to measure the impact of the systems and products that we're all building internally as well. Another quick question for folks in the room, how many people are working on agents? Or your team is working on agents? You get to raise your hand for that too. Okay. And how many people have already written an eval before? Okay, so my goal is for that, everyone who's working on agents, who is the first group, if you haven't written an eval yet, in that second group, my goal is to kind of get your hands up, hopefully by the end of this, but if not by the end of this, maybe when you watch the recording. So we will have a live workshop part of this. So if you want to, and you want to follow along, you can also pull out your laptop. There'll be a QR code, and you can follow a link, and I'll actually walk folks through some of the workflows for writing evals as well. So we're going to get into it. My goal today, intro to observability, what is it, why does it matter? And then we're going to talk about evals. So evals are sort of the thing that comes after observability. Sometimes if I have like a 15-minute slot and someone's like, hey, can you just talk about evals? I'm like, sure, here's some stuff on evals. But since the organizers have been so kind to give me a little bit more time on this one, I'm going to actually start from first principles. And that's actually the goal. I think that we as product people, we should challenge the narrative out here a little bit. So I'm actually hoping that people can ask me some hot take questions. You have some time to think about do we need evals? This sort of comes up as well, this rhetoric of do we actually need to be doing evals? We're going to start from before evals, in the Stone Age, which is observability. And then the how we're going to do that is by actually building an app and developing mental models for evals. So a quick observability TLDR, just for folks that might be new to this term. Observability is basically how you know whether your agent is wired up correctly and doing what you expect it to do. It lets you answer questions from the outside of the system and also understand it without knowing all of the sort of nitty-gritty inner workings. And then it really the main thing is it allows you to answer and troubleshoot issues when they come up. And we'll kind of show what that means in a sec, but it basically helps you answer the question of why is this happening? So you can't do evals without observability. So if people are trying to tell you, hey, just look at data in a spreadsheet, well, how does the data even get there, right? Or what does the data represent? Someone on your team is probably thinking about what data to look at. And that's actually where a lot of the juice is, or the juice to squeeze here, which is you need to make sure that you actually have the right data in place before you do evals in the first place. So there's a little bit of a mental model here, which is you just kind of need to know the two terms here, which are a trace and a span, which I'm going to kind of use a little bit more and more as we get into this. But you can really think about a trace as how you get from the end route from how to go from point A to point B. And this is sort of like a delivery route here as an example. And each of the steps that this person that's delivering a package is taking, which is like pick up a package, get directions, turn onto a street, database query, because this is like AI generated. But final check, like each of those are spans basically within the trace, the end-to-end delivery route. And so those are really the mental models. You need a trace, which is, hey, I'm going to go and like deliver this thing from point A to point B. The spans are the steps that I take to actually get there. Observability is really like, how many people have like seen this meme before of like, it's a fan, it's this, it's that. It's basically a bunch of scientists looking at an elephant from different perspectives and sort of debating what they're looking at. I'm actually going to put my CEO on the spot since he's here a little bit and to sort of poke some fun. I was using our product the other day and I'm like, Jason, the freaking Copilot you're working on is broken and it's not working for me. And he's like, show me the span, show me what's wrong with it. And I was like, you got me, man. Like I have to go and actually look at the data to basically go back and say that something is broken in the first place. So when you talk to your engineering team, when you talk to the teams that's actually building the agent, they don't talk about things as like, user product problems, right? They're not looking at, they don't care oftentimes about what one particular user may have hit. I mean, maybe they care. I don't want to put engineers on blast here. Maybe they care. But what they really care about, what the engineering teams really care about is like, show me the data. And the data is a span. And a span is basically the unit that you can use to communicate with your engineering team or with anyone working on agents in your company. So that's sort of the part I want to kind of, for folks to kind of take away from this is it's all a span. At the end of the day, it's a row of data somewhere. Something is happening that's broken. And your job is to go figure out what that is. So kind of like to zoom out from here a little bit here, observability is how you know that when you make a change to your system, you can actually verify the change actually took effect. So think about it this way. It's not just like what your system looks like in the current state. If you're changing your architecture of the agent, if you're changing your prompt, if you're changing your model, or you're changing the context that's going into it, all of those things you should be able to verify with observability as well. And then when you couple that with evals, you can make sure that your system is getting better. I can't tell you how many times I've like looked at an agent and I'm using Claude Code or Cursor and I'm like, why isn't this taking effect? And the cursor just keeps gaslighting me and it's just like, no, I promise I made the change you asked me for. And then I just go in and I take a screenshot of my traces in Arize and I'm like, no, you didn't, it's right here. And he's like, you're absolutely right. I didn't make the change I told you I did. Like this thing happens all the time. The only mechanism I have to actually work with the coding agent is my traces in the first place. And I'm going to kind of show you what I mean by that as well. So this is the live demo portion. If you want to follow along, there's a QR code to a Notion page. I'm also cognizant that like QR codes are not a great way to communicate links on a laptop. So apologies for that. Hopefully you can go from yeah, it's there, I promise. But I'll kind of show it, and afterwards, if you bother me, I'll send you the link so you can follow along in your own time as well. But what this QR code will take you to is actually, I teach a course on Maven. I actually recommend people don't take it because I don't like to be like, hey, I have a course, like take a course. I actually, the only reason I would say take the course is if you want to ask questions and do this stuff live with other people. So like that's the main value from it. But this is actually lesson 1. So you're just getting it for free if you want to just copy it, follow along here. But feel free to take it if you want to kind of ask questions. We go much deeper than this, but I want to kind of just show a little bit of what that looks like. And lesson 1 is basically what is Cursor and why is it so powerful for a PM? Not the topic that we're talking about right now, but still something I'm very passionate about. But if you go a little bit further and further down here, you'll actually see that there's a part where we clone a repo and we open it in Cursor. And what we're going to do is actually set up tracing on that repo. The repo is, I'm not going to explain what a repo is here, but it's more just a directory of files that you can get from GitHub. And this is a, sorry, don't look at my keys. This is basically a sort of a trip planner bot, classic example of like, oh, help me plan a trip. Well, it's using one of the sort of popular agent frameworks right now called LangGraph. And what I did before this session, like a couple hours ago, is I just like vibe coded and prompted it, I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of feeling like instead of doing a trip planner, why don't you make this like a finance agent in the first place and just change the agent? And so this is what it put out. By the way, all of my prompting is like super simple. I'm just like, just go do this for me. Generate a finance agent. I don't even know what a finance agent does, but this is what Claude Code thinks a finance agent should look like. And this is the UI for it, which is I put in some like annual income. I add some time frame of years. I put in my risk tolerance and my financial goals, and it generates a financial plan for me. Cool. Okay. I mean, actually, maybe that's kind of helpful. But the way that I got here is, I have this front end UI working, but if I type in stuff, how do I know that what's actually happening underneath the hood here? How do I know if what the advice it's giving me is actually correct? For many folks in the room, you're probably not working on agents that are like trivial like this. Like you're most likely working on products that have like consequence. They have real users, and there's real implications when things go wrong. What's a fun hot take I'm gonna throw out there is you might be hearing from the coding companies, coding agent companies, we don't do evals, we just like vibe code and ship stuff. Well, yeah, you can do that if what you're generating is just like vibe coded products that, at the end of the day, like who cares if this is actually working or not? So the downstream users that if you have real customers that, at the end of the day have real business impact from using your product, that's when you need to verify that this stuff is actually correct. And the foundation model companies don't care. They're just gonna generate code that creates this type of stuff. But our job is now to figure out, okay, is this actually correct? Is this output correct in the first place? So what I like to do is, and you'll see this in the Notion doc as well, is I basically, when I make a change to my agent, all I'm doing is basically saying, like, I just ask it questions on the code base. So I'm like, how do I run this? So let's just, I actually just ran that right before. We can kill this just so we can do it live. So I'm gonna open up Claude Code. And I don't even like, I know, we should be more technical, we should verify things work, but I just use the coding agent to just say, how do I run this project? And it kind of figures it out from where it is in the code base. How many folks have actually used Claude Code or Cursor in the room? Okay, cool. So maybe hopefully this is like a recap for some folks, but this is basically how do I, use the tools like a PM, which is to say, I'm not actually writing code. I'm just trying to learn more about my code base and what's going on here. So I said, okay, run this app for me. And that's basically what you're seeing here, which is the local host version of this. And when it actually runs the app, we're gonna give it a sec to run in the background and sort of run that. If I don't even have observability in the first place, it's actually pretty simple to get set up with observability, which is all I really do is, if I wanna like learn what's going on in my code base, I can use one of any tools out there, observability tools, and we kind of mentioned a couple, which are Arize and Phoenix, which is where I happen to work. I'm biased. But there's other tools out there if you want to use other tools. Actually, let me show something else here really quick. You're going to get to see a couple more of these lesson plans. So I actually recommend just use the observability tool that kind of works best for you. I did a deep research on ChatGPT, and I'm like, which observability tool should I use? Okay, Arize Phoenix is actually pretty high up there. And so all you have to do is really copy paste the documents, like the get started page. Shout out to our DevRel team over here. They just are redoing our entire documents to make them more LLM friendly so that this actually works, which is I can take this link and I can go into Claude and I'll be like, implement tracing on my app and copy paste the links. And it will just be able to set up traces. So I'll run it, but I'm not actually gonna approve any of the changes because it's already working. I had this running before because I didn't wanna leave that to the demo gods. But basically it will actually go in and say, okay, I'm gonna help you instrument Arize Phoenix tracing on your application. And it actually goes in and we'll be able to read and say, oh, it looks like your app already has Phoenix tracing, and it's gonna actually go and try and do that. Let's stop it. But, and that's it. And really from that one step, even if I'm a PM, even if I'm non-technical, I can now have a way to actually get tracing and observability set up. So fun fact, when I was actually doing this, and let's run this over here. So it's actually running the same repo, and we'll give it a sec. When I first did this, when I was setting up this app, a couple hours ago, I went in and this is what was generated from the app. This is what I'm showing is Arize, which is the platform to actually view traces. So this is the data that is created when I actually send in a request here. So let's have this run, starting the application. We'll give it 1 minute here. Actually, let's see if this works. Is it working? Sorry, this is the live demo part of it. So, if it doesn't work, I'm going to blame Anthropic. Oh, okay, it worked. Anthropic's great today. So this is what the live plan I just created was, which is using the 75,000, 10, and moderate. And then when I go to Arize, you'll actually see this request here, which is the same inputs I just gave it, 75, 10 years, and moderate. And you can see the timestamp is the timestamp right now. And I'm going to come back to what we're looking at here in just a sec. But when I first tried to run this agent and I had the same input, this is what I got from the output here. And I basically saw all of these errors. And I was like, there's all these errors over here. And I don't really know what this means. So I just took a screenshot and I copy pasted the screenshot back into Claude. And I'm like, hey, I'm seeing these errors in Arize. Can you fix it? And it's like, you're absolutely right. There's all these errors. Let me go back and fix my work. So what I'm trying to illustrate is that it's really robust to use the coding agents to get set up with tracing. If you feel like there's data missing in the application that you want to use for iteration or to use to create data sets and run evals, which we're going to do, you can basically just use a coding agent to help you get observability set up in the first place. And then you'll want to take some steps to actually make sure it's set up correctly, which is like talk to your engineering team, understand the code, make sure that the code is actually being traced correctly. But the point here is that don't feel like this stuff is like technical and out of your depth, because it really is just talking to a coding agent with documentation and trying to understand, okay, what is coming out here? Does this look reasonable to me? I'll pause in case there's any questions here on anything I've shown so far on observability. Any questions? And it's okay if not. Yeah.
Can you just show the QR again?
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's an easy question. Anyone have another question as well? This is the QR code.
And one more follow-up question
Yeah.
to the land graph. So
Yeah.
set up in the observability platform, you could see the land graph. Do you also, if anyone wants to use this, can they make directly change it here itself and it gets reflected back in the portal?
Yeah, so the question is, hey, what if I want to change parts of my agent in this application and then have that persist in the code base? The short answer is yes, you can. The things that you can change are actually right now just the prompts. You're not able to change things like tool calls or architecture, though maybe that comes in the future. But this is an example of the prompt that's logged from that trip planner agent, which is basically what you see here, where the curly braces are context that go, that we're sort of plumbing through or populating from the application. And you can change this prompt and it will persist in your code base if that's how your code is set up. So you have to hook it up to Arize to store your prompts, and then you can actually pull down those prompts in your code as well.
Do you have like a webhook as well that we can connect to LangChain UI as well? Because LangChain also has a platform where you can just start building these agents and have these A-to-A communication tools.
Yeah.
It's a good question. We should definitely chat after that. There's some of this stuff is on our roadmap, but we can make sure that that's being covered for sure. Any questions on any of this so far? Observability before we get, does this kind of making sense on why we're looking at tracing and why we're starting with observability for folks here? Cool, okay. Okay, so, and I'm gonna kind of go back here and I'll show, the finance planner agent really quick, which is what you're seeing here. And you'll see, just to kind of make those terms more clear again, we talked about traces. A trace is this top level object, which is one input which the user is giving, and then the final output. And then when you open the trace, you actually see parts of that step by step, and these are spans. So each of these rows are spans. And what you're actually seeing here is you have an agent with multiple sub-agents actually, which you can also get from this view, which is there's 3 sub-agent nodes. And that all goes into a final agent, and that's what's generating the output. But underneath the hood, there are LLM calls and tool calls and more kind of sophisticated things happening. Fun fact, this is actually a really simple agent. It's very likely if you are building agents in your own company today, they look much more complex than this. So just a fun like light bulb moment of like, if this feels like a lot, your code is probably even more complicated than this. But the way that you want to look at it is really through this lens of like, what's my data look like, traces and spans. Another way to look at it is like, these are interactions that people are having with the agent and what decisions the agent is making along the way. So that's a little bit of just a primer on observability. But the thing is that when you're looking at your agent, it's kind of like, it's nice to like see it for the first time, but it doesn't actually, it's kind of hard to answer some of the questions around like, how is my agent performing? It's just data, right? I'm just looking at like rows of data. Maybe I'll just pull that up again one more time just so we kind of look more specifically at this. But what I can see is that this is my input. This is my output, which is the same output I got from the application here, which is my financial plan. And then if I go a little bit further down and I see the summary here, I can see that there's a prompt that says create a comprehensive 10-year financial plan. And then I have the output. But I don't really have much more information than this. I just have inputs and outputs, and maybe you're getting some signal back from the application of like a thumbs up, thumbs down from your user. But in many cases, users don't leave that information anyway. They're not like, they don't care, right? They're like, most users are like, I'm just using this chatbot, I want to go on with my life. And so how do you know when you want to go and improve on the system, how to go and improve and iterate on it? Well, my friends, that's where evals comes in. So what are evals and why do they matter? The reality is you've probably seen me at some point, you know, if you've seen me before, I've probably shown this slide, but LLMs hallucinate, and our job is to make sure that they don't embarrass us, our company, or our brand. And you don't have to take my word for it. The CPOs of the companies that are literally selling us LLMs, you know, like hotcakes, like $10 billion of revenue, $100 billion of revenue, they're all telling us that we should probably be writing evals, which is just another way of saying we should probably be checking the outputs of these systems and making sure that they're correct. So it's kind of interesting, like I don't know another time in industry where it's like, hey, I'm going to give you this thing, but you should definitely verify that it's working before you go and use it. So that's really what evals are. They're a way for us to check the outputs and the way that the system works before the downstream user gets hit with, you know, a bad product experience. I wanted to like make this a little bit more clear by kind of saying explicitly what evals are and what they aren't, what we're going to be talking about. A lot of times when companies or AI foundation labs talk about evals, they're talking about model evaluation. Model evaluation is terms like SWE bench, if you've heard of that term before, or like MMLU, which is a multiple choice data set. These are what the labs use to make sure that their models are performing well. And they create these like large open source data sets that people use to say like Claude is better than OpenAI or whatever. It's the way that you can basically say my model is better than your model. But we're not actually going to focus on that. We're focusing on LLM system evaluation, which is how well the application we're building actually works. And this is actually kind of unique because it's actually each time that you're building out a new part of your product or feature or functionality, you're actually taking real world data and building a data set from that. So this is like custom evals. Think of it as another way of we're going to be looking at evals on our own data, not on the data from like these large model providers. And just to make this more concrete, when we think about an LLM app, it has all of these components like prompts, tool calling, memory, data sources, and that's what the application that we're measuring is. This is pretty distinctly different from the software testing world that most of us have probably been building applications in, because this is pretty new. For myself, when I was getting started, I got kind of lucky where I got to work at a self-driving car company, and this is how we thought about evals. But for most engineers, like they're just gonna say like evals are just unit tests, like I have evals. Like don't worry, PM, get out of my this part of the company, like go work on like product requirement docs or whatever. Like I have the evals on lock. I'm building unit tests. They're just fine. But the reality is that there's a pretty big difference between software testing and integration tests and unit tests and evals. And I think of software testing and integration testing as sort of similar to a train on a track. Sorry for the folks that got stuck in the Muni today, because this analogy won't land as well. But usually when you get into a train, you kind of expect to reach your end destination at a certain time. And that's really what sort of repeated software and unit testing helps with. It makes sure that when you run code, you get from point A to point B 100% of the time in the same amount of time. Evals and unit LLM testing actually looks more like measuring someone on how they drive or their performance when they're driving. Like, think about it this way: if we have a driver's license, it doesn't mean that we're all sort of driving the same way, and yet somehow we're all able to drive. And that's really what an eval is measuring for, which is this changing environment and the behavior of humans in this changing environment. Now you're actually measuring the behavior of an agent or an LLM system that's non-deterministic. So software is deterministic, unit tests are deterministic, but your integration tests rely on existing code base and documentation. In the LLM world, LLM agents are non-deterministic, they can take different paths, but improving the agent relies on real-world data. And that's actually something that's pretty different from the software and engineering sort of world that we've lived in for a long time. I'll pause here really quick. Any questions on eval so far before we push a little bit further? Yeah.
Okay, so I've been playing around with the new Notion agents, and there is a document that is like the instructions page, and I'm trying to figure out when I tell my Notion agent, like, update your instruction page to do this, am I giving it an eval, or is that not the same thing?
Yeah, it kind of sounds like you're prompting the agent to update its own instructions. Is that another way to look at it? I feel like I need a slide of like, is it an eval? You know, like the meme of like the butterfly, like, is this just an eval? Okay, so I think it sort of depends, actually, in that case. That one is kind of nuanced. What it sounds like to me, and it's a good way to kind of illustrate this slide, which is there's kind of 4 types of evals that tend to come up. There's LLM as a judge, which is like the hot one that everyone wants to like learn more about, LLM as a judge. But there's code-based evals, which are like, is the code actually correct? What you're kind of describing is like a human annotation, which is some feedback you're giving to the system to improve on itself, which is this like expected output or instruction that you're giving. So it's not explicitly an eval, but if you were building your own system and managing and maintaining it, you could sort of use human annotation to change the system prompt of the agent. And that would be like using your instructions to update the agent itself. So someone might take that data of your, hey, do this instead, and use that in a data set as an eval for if they're actually changing the Notion agent. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. Some more research that we're actually doing on our side in Arize as well is actually, think about like Claude Code or Cursor, we're actually running evals on the quality of the code and using it to rewrite the system prompt of the coding agent itself. And that's actually using evals to rewrite a system prompt. So if you're interested in that, feel free to chat with anyone on the Arize team and we can share some research around that with you as well. Okay, but I'm actually going to focus a little bit more on the business metrics side because this is what we care about, right? As product people, for many of us, we care about like what's the downstream impact of all of this stuff we're changing, like the code, we're rewriting the prompts, we're changing the context, we're changing the model, but who cares? At the end of the day, is the product getting better or worse? Well, what I'm hoping to kind of explain is, and we'll skip that one for now. Let me come back to kind of jump ahead here a little bit. What I'm hoping to sort of like get across is that you can kind of think of these evals as a funnel. And at the very top level, you have business or product metrics, which are, is your customer actually having a good experience or not? And the way that you get that data back can either be from humans that are labeling those interactions, and probably many of you have teams internally that are looking at data, labeling it. Maybe you're using experts to label your data. But you need to be able to drill in further than that. When you actually get someone saying, hey, this is a bad experience, or this was a bad session, can you take a look at it? What are you going to do to actually go deeper on that? And that's where connecting evals back to individual spans helps you answer that question. So for instance, let's take the example of a customer support bot, right? And let's say this is a good example because I booked a trip here. Let's say I was flying United, and I needed to, hypothetically, I didn't have to do this, but actually, let's say I'm like traveling back to New York, and I'm like, you know what? Actually, I want to cancel my flight. I want to stay in San Francisco for a few days longer. And I would go to the United customer support bot, and I'd say, hey, can you cancel my flight? Well, the agent's going to look that up, and it's going to be an LLM now, probably, because that's what we're doing. We're putting LLMs in the product. And the system will say, actually, you're not eligible for a refund, right? Like your flight leaves in less than 24 hours. We're sorry, but you're kind of locked in at this point. And I would probably give that experience a thumbs down because I might be a frustrated user, and I'm like, well, I just want to get my flight refunded. Like what's the big deal? Sorry, I guess in this case I'm really not a very nice user, but let's just go with it, roll with it for now. And so I might give that experience a thumbs down. Well, if someone's looking at that, they're going to say, well, the agent did all the right things. It pulled the right data, it has the right information, and actually took the right steps here to say, I'm not eligible for a refund. On the other hand, what if I end up coaxing the customer support agent? I'm like, please, I promise I'll be a really good customer. I'm going to fly United again next week. I promise I'm going to be great. Just give me a refund. And in that case, you can kind of manipulate these agents, and it's like, all right, sure, here you go. Here's your refund. Well, I'm going to give that a thumbs up, right? I just had a great customer support bot experience. But in reality, the agent didn't do the right thing. And so it's really important, and this is why I think product people thinking about AI products from the lens of the customer and from the lens of business metrics will help you kind of think about, okay, when you're seeing this data, how do you actually know what's happening underneath it? And so then you can start asking the team questions like, was the right data retrieved? Did the LLM even use the data correctly? Is the LLM, I have tone here, but like, does the LLM sound the way we want it to? Another example of this is the LLM following the rules that we put into the prompt in the first place or not? And then you basically want to ladder that up to, is the LLM or the agent doing the thing we told it to do, but what happens when that isn't the same as the product experience in the first place, when it doesn't line up with the user level evals? So when you start from the top level, you can start to sort of drill down deeper and deeper into the performance of the application and the agent. We'll use another example here just to make that a little bit more tactical, and then we'll come back to the evals, and we're going to run an eval after this as well. So let's take another example, a trip planner agent, the one that we just built. But let's pretend now that I actually gave it access to book a flight for me. And so now maybe I want it to take action. By the way, I don't think this world is like super far away. When we think about what agents can do, like they're getting better. I don't want to be here, up here saying like these things suck, they never work. Like they are getting better because people in the room are thinking about how to make these product experiences more reliable and better. So I think that we should expect that it's very likely in the next few years that you will actually just give an agent a credit card and it can actually just figure out what flight to book you on and book a hotel. Like that might actually be a world in the near future. But let's just go through this example and say, okay, well, what happens if the agent doesn't do what it's supposed to do? So for instance, let's say for some reason, for whatever reason, it books me a flight from San Francisco and instead I land up in San Diego. Okay, fun fact here, there's a customer, I won't name the name of the customer, but in the early days they actually are working on like, let's say it's like a trip planner type of agent. And what we found was they were looking at their data and they're like, yeah, for some reason the recommendations just are off. Like we don't know why it's giving recommendations that just don't seem correct. And what we found was that we started putting in some like example data. We're just testing the app ourselves. And we'd say like, help me book a ski resort in northern Italy, for instance. Help me book a trip to northern Italy. I want to go skiing. And it would sort of return places that weren't in Italy, which seems like a pretty easy thing to check, right? Like you're just looking a quick look up on a city and like, is this in Italy or not? Well, it turns out what was going on there was there was a part of the prompt that said, always return 10 lists of hotels or 10 items in the list of hotels. And there aren't 10 ski resorts in northern Italy. But the prompt of the agent was like, no, I have to find 10 ski resorts and put it in this list or the user is going to be really upset at me. And so it would go out and find like other random places and put them into the list. And so that's an example of like, sometimes when these agents fail, it's not always the most obvious failures. It's these like weird sort of subtle changes in your data. And so evals will help you actually figure out where the thing is going wrong. Is it calling the wrong tool? Is there something wrong in the search or the context? Is it being jailbroken or inappropriate for some reason? Any of those things going wrong can actually lead to a negative user experience in the first place. So that's why it's kind of important to think about this stuff as not just one type of eval, but actually a combination of evals that you could use. You can use humans, you can use code, you can use LLM as a judge, you can use annotation. So you can think about this as an eval strategy that you want to bring back to like how to figure out how things are going, what things are going wrong in your system. And then just for folks that maybe have never written an eval prompt before, this is what that looks like. Basically, it's just a text prompt that you're giving to your agent. And that's, I think what's kind of cool about this world is that we as product people, kind of Jason was alluding to this earlier, we have an insane amount of leverage at our company because it's just text. It's not even code oftentimes. It's just like, how are you prompting the system to get what you want out of it? Well, the good news is that LLM as a judge is just text, at least for now. Like, who knows what looks, maybe OpenAI tomorrow drops something crazy, I have no idea. But right now, it's just a prompt, which is you're examining written text. Here's the context where you provide the context, which is in green. And then you're basically telling the system, your job is to look at the text and make a judgment and classify that. And then that's the last part, which is determining the label and defining the terminology. And you can give examples. The screenshot is from the blog post that we did with Lenny's newsletter. But I would add one more note to this, and I should probably message him to just like update this. But you can also add examples of what toxic or not toxic means to sort of reinforce that further as well in the prompt. And then when you think about an eval system, these are the three components to think about. So I'd want to kind of like, especially LLM as a judge, but really any eval system, you can just replace the LLM in prompt. All you're looking at is the eval prompt. You're kind of hooking that up into LLMs, and then you're basically running that system on top of data. And the data looks like those same spans that we saw earlier. It's input, output, maybe there's some metadata, and then a label or expected output. Okay, so the next part here is we're actually going to get into running evals. Sorry again for the eye test again, but I'll kind of read this out, and I will, if you message me after, I can share a post where I go into more depth on this process with a friend of mine, Peter Yang, who's at Roblox, who just like loves to learn about this stuff. We kind of did a podcast episode on this. But this is really what real world evals looks like. And we're going to get up until about this part in the journey. So we're starting with the basic prompt for our agent, but then we need to actually categorize and look at failures and build data sets around that. This part of the job, by the way, is like super not sexy, right? It's like looking at data, building data sets, labeling it. It's also probably one of the most important parts of the whole system, because unless you actually get good quality labels and data, your team can't actually start building evals or judges on top of this to go and scale yourself up. So it's really, really important to get those first few steps right, which is what are the failure modes in the first place? How do I figure that out? And then let me actually go and label the data to kind of break down those failures further and further. And then you can do all the cool stuff like LLM as a judge to like scale yourself, to like have millions of rows. But you want to start with like 10 rows of data first, get the judges kind of working, then scale up to 100 rows of data, get more confident. Then you can start with a small A/B test internally, or maybe with your 1% of your users, or maybe an internal test. And then you have real world data that you can look at to actually make a judgment of how is my agent performing. The reality is that once you launch in the real world, you'll find new failure modes. You'll discover ways that people are using your product that you didn't expect, and that gives you an opportunity to iterate on the original system and the eval in the first place. So. But I will say, even though I'm kind of laying out like 9 steps here, I do also think that you can, most teams kind of wait too long to get to this online world. They want everything to be like buttoned up and correct before you go out. And they're like, internally there's all these debates of like, how much data do we need? Do we need thousands of rows? Do we need all these labelers with all these labels? I think start small. Start with 10 rows, make a judgment call. Are you feeling confident? Do you need more data? How much more data? 100 rows? Maybe that's an afternoon of the team just looking at the data and labeling it. And then you actually have a data set that you can feel pretty good about and go and launch that test and get feedback from real users, because you're not going to know how people use this stuff. So I'm actually a strong advocate for don't wait too long to ship on your AI product. Try to get through this process as fast as you can. In fact, we're going to go through the first couple of steps here just in this session. Any questions on this so far? How am I doing on time? Okay, cool, awesome. Just got to make sure because my Apple Watch died. Someone needs to work on Apple Watch evals for battery. Okay, so all right, live demo time. We're going to run through, let's actually run an eval to classify which traces to look at. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up Arize again. And I'll kind of just keep hitting on this point, which is, I think there's this like meta point in San Francisco, which is like there's a lot of noise around evals and eval tools in the first place. I'm a pretty strong advocate for just use what's available. Open source, is definitely ideal because then you're not locked into any particular tool. The workflow I'm going to show you is agnostic of whatever tool you're using. So you can use whatever you already might have at your company, but highly recommend it's open source. But what we're going to do is we're just going to start taking a look at some of the data. And these are actually, I'm going to go back here. Instead of the finance agent that I built earlier, let's take a look at some of the trip planner data that I had from that same agent, except now it's like helping me plan a trip. Let's take a look at one of these examples. So I have a destination here. It's like Lisbon. I'm going for 5 days. My budget is 1,200. And then I'm getting back here a itinerary. Let's take a closer look at what this itinerary looks like. So this is what the system prompt is, which is create a 5-day itinerary for Lisbon. And then you can actually see what the day-by-day itinerary is. But again, we're kind of not sure, like, is this a good itinerary? I don't know. It really depends on a bunch of different factors. The first thing we might want to look at is, are we seeing that users are frustrated? And we can just kind of go in and look at that row by row. And because we have this field here, which is user input, frustration. I'm really frustrated. Sorry, some of this data is like, it's made up. But you can kind of like, connect the dots here, get the gist of like how this would look like for your own agent that you might be building. But you can see here that I'm really frustrated. Stop giving me generic advice. Give me specifics. So this is me sort of using the agent to actually try to get trip results back or trip itinerary. You can see I want to visit the lost city of Atlantis for scuba diving. Oh, that sounds kind of nice. But like when I look at this, I'm basically thinking, and how do I even know what my failure modes are in the first place? I'm just sort of looking at data and trying to get a better sense of like, what are my failure modes? So I might start at the top level and just try to find examples where the user is frustrated. And this is where I kind of recommend there's two approaches essentially to looking at your data. And we kind of break this down a little bit more in this Notion page. But you can basically just naively sort of look at the data itself. And you can kind of sometimes see, okay, this is a frustrated user. Let me create a data set with this user that's frustrated. But sometimes it's hard to see what the failure modes are in the first place. So you might want to combine two approaches here. Some of that is just looking at traces and creating data sets. And we can do that by just clicking in here. And we know that this is a frustrated user because they said that they are. So I'm going to add this to my data set for itineraries. Actually, let's do this one, 1021. So I'm going to add that to my itineraries data set of like examples that I want to go take a closer look at. Or I can use an LLM to help me take a first pass of my data to help me label and understand, okay, where are users frustrated? And maybe I can just go take a look at those rows specifically. So it's kind of like using an LLM as sort of like a cheat code to take a first pass of labeling my data. And that's so when you think about evals, it's not just like the eval as this top level benchmark that we need to go and improve on from our engineering team. We can also use evals as a way to kind of scale up our own labeling to then look into the data further. And this is what I'm kind of doing here, which is I'm writing an eval for user frustration, and I'm going to run that eval on all of my data. And you can see here it says, you are given a conversation between a user and an assistant. Examine the conversation and determine whether or not the user got frustrated from the experience. This is what frustration means. And this is just an eval prompt that I wrote in Arize. All of this is it's no code, low code, so you can actually just write the prompt yourself. And it's going to return two values, either normal or frustrated. And so with this, I can now actually run this on all of my historical data. And I kind of ran this right before just to kind of save time. But this is basically what that looks like. All I'm doing is I'm saying, label my data, figure out if the user is frustrated, and then I'm going to go and take a closer look at those spans that say that the user is frustrated in the first place. So it's just sort of taking this first pass on the data for me. So when I go back to my trip planner agent, I can see here that I have some evals, which are user frustration label. And I can say, show me users that are frustrated. I'm going to click that. And then I can go in and see, oh, these are all of the examples that the LLM said my user is frustrated. And this may have actually, in the old world, in the olden days, this would have actually been like something I would have had to like send to my labeling team to say, hey, can you go and like take a look at these thousands of rows or hundreds of rows of data and find the examples I should take a closer look at? You can kind of start using evals to help you take that first pass. And then you can start, when you actually look at the data, you can start to understand, okay, what am I looking at? What are the failure modes here? And the best part about this actually is you don't only get a label from the LLM, you also get the LLM's reasoning. So you can see here that the user explicitly states, I'm really frustrated, stop giving me generic advice. This shows clear frustration. So for every label that I'm getting where a user is frustrated, I'm also getting an explanation for why. And that's really, really powerful for me to try to understand what are some of the failure modes I might want to start labeling or creating data sets around. By the way, oh yeah, go ahead actually. Yeah.
Do you limit it in any way? Like, there is a use of common field, or do you let it run wild across all of the data?
Good question. So I let it just run on all of the input because these LLMs actually have a really large context windows, a lot of them. So you can give it the entire span, or sometimes even the entire trace, and it can actually look across all of that to figure out, oh, what's going on in my data. This actually brings up a really good point, which is one thing I wanted to show and kind of forgot to mention earlier is we actually have a tool in the product, which is what Jason kind of alluded to earlier, which is our own AI assistant or agent in the product. And I can just ask the assistant simple questions, the same thing I ask Cursor, because again, I'm super lazy as a PM. I really just want to get answers quickly, and I will go and like gut check later. But this is my favorite prompt. I just say, what's going on here? Because I don't want to make an assumption that there's anything going on here. You tell me, agent. And the agent will go in and say, this trace is for a multi-step itinerary. This is what's going on. So and then it says, oh, by the way, your user is really frustrated. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. Maybe I should go write an eval for that. And so so I don't even need to get into my code. I don't really even need to look at all of this data to get that answer, because I'm using AI to tell me what I should go and look at in the first place. So this is an example of how we as product people can use AI to actually get more technical without actually having to get too much more technical. So now I've set up traces, I've understood what my traces are, and I wrote an eval without really writing any single line of code so far. Yeah?
How do you handle if the LLM hallucinates wildly from your data?
Yeah, good question. So, the interesting part about these LLM systems for evals is that they actually they're not always going to get things right. And this is a little bit of what we're going to get into in a sec, but what you're trying to do is actually build sort of this loop where you're collecting data, running evals, collecting data sets of failure modes, annotating that data yourself internally, and then using that for improving on the prompt. But you need to do a similar loop for improving on the evals. So this like naive eval that I wrote for user frustration, I would not use that to like drive a business metric. But I might use it as a starting point. I might use that to say, we really care about user frustration as a metric. Here's my first look at it. I just wrote a prompt to find that. But your team is going to come back and say, do we really trust this metric? Like, is this judge working the way it's supposed to? Well, now you have this other job, which is to actually measure the quality of the evals. And you can do a very similar approach as you're building for your improving agent flow, which is you start finding examples where the evals don't agree with their human labels. And you can build data sets around that, annotate that, and sort of explain where the eval got things wrong, and then use that to improve on the eval in the first place. So it's the same loop, but actually twice. Most people think about agents as one loop. They're actually two loops. I stole this slide from Andrej Karpathy. He put this up like 6 or 7 years ago when he was working at Tesla. It's the same system. How many people have taken a Waymo before? This is San Francisco, so like everyone has taken it, right? Okay, yeah. Sometimes I go to other places and they're like, what's a Waymo? But if you've taken a Waymo before, this is exactly how Waymo works. It is taking on-road data, using that to train the model, but it's also building a data set of scenarios to use for improving the systems to actually measure the model in the first place. Great question. Yeah. Yeah.
So how accurate is LLM in defining frustrating?
Yeah, so that's actually, it's a good question because there's a bit of an assumption here, which is that we can actually trust the evals in the first place, right? Like, do we trust the LLM as a judge? But what I'm kind of advocating for is once I actually decide that I care about user frustration, I should build a data set to measure the performance of the eval itself. So I can use this as an example of like, I could disagree. Okay, here the user is saying that they're frustrated, but maybe it's more subtle. And maybe we can find an example here where the user didn't say that they're frustrated as well and just take a look at that. Okay, so here's a good example, right? The user says, this is the third time I'm asking. Now, that's ambiguous. Like, is the user frustrated or are they just really clear and direct? Stating a fact. And that might be an example where I can add this to a data set and create a new data set, which is user frustration eval. And I would give this a different label than frustrated. I would say this is actually not a frustrated user, it's just a very direct user. And don't label this as frustrated. And then I can go back and update my eval prompt based on this data. Does that make sense? Yeah. So one thing we didn't really touch on is the how, like the metrics for some of this. So let's go ahead and go one level deeper on this, which is once you have a data set in the first place, what do you do then? Well, what you can do, let's pull this up here. What you can do is then start evaluating your data set using those labels that you're creating, which are annotations and evals together. And what that looks like is, let's say I want to take this data set of examples. Let me kind of show this a little bit here. So I can open up one of these and you can see here, okay, this is what it looks like. Create a 5-day itinerary for Dubai or whatever, whatever this looks like. And this is just the same itinerary spans I was looking at before. But now I can go in and actually change parts of my prompt. And when I do that, I can load in a prompt here. Try and make the screen a little bit bigger. This is what my original prompt looks like, which is create a duration. These are the variables that go into my agent, which are the duration, the destination, the traveled style. It's the same thing that you're kind of seeing here, which are destination, duration, traveled style, interests and hobbies and things like that. And that basically, for every single user, you have these rows, which are the duration, destination, travel style. So you're building a data set with different rows that go into these variables. And I can take this and say, you know what, I want to change a part of my prompt. And now I want to actually say, make sure you always respond in a friendly tone and use emojis. For some reason, our team is really gung-ho on emojis. Every single message must contain an emoji. I don't know why. I'm just the PM. I don't decide this stuff. But let's go ahead and measure that anyway. And so actually, I think if you're the PM, you should probably push back on that. But that's besides the point. So here, what I can do is actually then write an eval that says, I want to make sure that this LLM is always friendly. And the definition of friendly is that it should always contain an emoji. I'm using kind of a tone example here. But think about this as anytime I give a rule, like if I have a policy team, right, that is deciding that my agent always has to do these 5 things. It has to check its own work. It has to make sure that the answer is always in a certain, answers a certain way. It's the same problem, which is I need to verify the output of the system and make sure it's following rules. And that's an example of what this eval looks like. And so I can now click this and turn this on and rerun this data set with 2 versions of the prompt, A and B, and run an eval on the output to get a sense of are we actually making the system better or worse? And this is an example of using an eval to not just catch problems with your data, but actually verify that you're actually improving the system using the same metric on the same dimension. So yeah, a lot of emojis here in this one. Maybe I'm like only use 1 emoji, that's probably fine. And then here, when it doesn't use an emoji, because this is the old version of the prompt, you can see that it says that the label is robotic because it doesn't contain an emoji. And that's what we care about. Wow, this is a really flirty LLM system. You guys hear that OpenAI is going to start? Yeah, okay, I won't get there. Okay, so this is an example of what this looks like. So okay, so as we kind of go further, this is using actually this is kind of related. Let me kind of zoom back a little bit. Now we've actually run prompts, we've created data sets, we've labeled data, we've evaled the labeled data, we've evaled the new prompt that we built. But what does this really mean? Like at the end of the day, we're thinking about the business, we're thinking about the product and about the end user experience. And with this combination of creating data sets of spans and using annotations and evals, what this is actually doing is allowing us to feel more confident as we get closer to shipping. So I've heard, there was a story, I mean like someone, I won't name names, but like we have a customer, or someone mentioned to me actually, it wasn't even a customer, it was like a PM that's taking my course that went and said, you know, our team has been working on this problem for like 9 months. And I decided to just apply what I've learned in the first 2 weeks, which is I went in and I cursored our observability and I built in data set and I labeled the data and I came up with an eval and I went back to the team. And it like blew their mind because they've been working on this for like 9 months, but they just didn't know where to get started. And I think that that's really what this kind of approach helps with, which is it helps distill through the noise, like how do you communicate with your stakeholders and get aligned around just getting started in the first place? Because I think that that's really, really hard when you're working with teams which aren't, they're not always confident around like, well, they don't want to put their name on this AI system that's going to go rogue or not work well. And that's where I think that there's an opportunity for PMs to help with conveying, hey, here's the thing that we really care about, user frustration, tone, here's some metrics to get started with based on the data I built. What do you guys think about this? And like, then they can shoot it down and they can iterate on it, but now you're coming with the starting point. And so as you know, you can actually go from not being stuck for like the last 6 months to getting closer to the ship date in a matter of a few hours or a few days. And that's what I think is really, really powerful about all of these systems and tools I'm showing. Everything I just showed was just in the last like 30 minutes, right? Like I'm not doing anything super sophisticated or like training a model. I'm literally just writing prompts and looking at the data that I'm getting back. There's a good question around aligning evals, a couple good questions around that. Here's how that looks like in Arize. You kind of saw the 2 loops already, but here's what this is a good slide to like take a photo of if you're thinking of building this type of system internally or using it, because it just has the terms here. It's kind of like a cheat sheet, which is when you're thinking about data sets, what do you care about? This is curating a data set, iterating on a data set. What does offline versus online mean here? Offline is the whole system I'm iterating on before I actually ship the agent to production. And then online, these are the tools I can use for online data as well. So this is just a nice like mental model for iterating on your agent, but also iterating on the eval. And this is the same slide we just covered. So just a couple of like examples here. So I'm not full of it, but there's actually like customers we have that are really been using us since really, I mean, in their case, from their day one. Handshake is huge. They're actually just down the street from here. They have a whole AI team. And they have a ton of LLM use cases in production. Fun fact, one of the engineers there actually used us in his old company. And then when he moved over to Handshake, he's also using us there. So we're really lucky to have like, customers that kind of, whenever they go to new companies, they're like, we should bring in Arize as well, which is really cool. And the TLDR of this is we actually help them communicate across their whole team on understanding how to eval, but also look at data in the first place. And I won't go through all of these case studies, but just want to show a couple of examples here. And these are linked. So if you want to actually listen to the engineers talk about their usage of, again, they're not just, what I like about these case studies is it's not just like, oh my God, Arize is amazing. They actually just talk about the how. They figure out what's going wrong with their system. So if you are in a company that is building agents, you can actually listen from people that are building agents and seeing like what are the pitfalls that they kind of hit. Because they're at this point now where they're iterating on the agent as well. And then yeah, just a quick like Arize is agnostic of whatever tools you might be using upstream. We don't care if you're using what model, what infrastructure, what framework you're using. We are intended to be built basically plug and play with whatever systems you're using internally. That's kind of what allows us to get into so many different teams in the first place. And then just a quick FAQ when you're thinking about LLM judges, they're never going to be 100% correct technique. I highly recommend starting with the best models first and then moving over to cheaper, faster models. And the reason for that is because then you'll just start with a higher benchmark, and then you know that that's the performance that you can get, and then you can always kind of swap it out and go for cheaper models. The whole point here is that you'll need to tune your LLM judge based on your own data, your human data as well. And then this last one is really important. Always use discrete classification labels, like incorrect or correct. You'll notice I did that, which is like frustrated or not frustrated or normal. Don't use like scores like 20% or 1 to 5 scaled. That just doesn't work with LLM as a judge systems for a lot of different reasons, and we're happy to share the research behind that too. But we highly recommend using discrete labels. Yeah.
What about for cases where there's no clear pass or go? Like, let's say it's judging an email and then rating it from 1 to 10.
Yeah. So in that case, like, what are the things you would care about with judging an email?
Like friendliness, kind of these like more art versus science type things, right? Like tone.
Mm-hmm. But could you qualify in that case, like, what very friendly or kind of friendly or not so friendly looks like? And that's kind of like explaining it to a human as well. Like, and as you and I are like chatting about it, you could be like, here's an example of something that's really friendly. Here's an example of like kind of friendly, but not that friendly, right? And like these are things that are like human judgmentable to some degree. And so what this process of like us iterating on this, what I'm getting at is like you can give a range of labels, and that will perform better than trying to do a score from like 1 to 10. Because if I look at an email and you look at an email and we both look at it and we're like, how friendly is this email? Are we going to get the same score? We might get different scores, right? But we might be able to land on the same amount of like very friendly, not so friendly, as long as we have examples for what that looks like.
And then to build on that, it's not a single eval, right? You're just going to break it into like a dozen.
You might have multiple dimensions you care about too, yeah. So you can think about friendly as like, break that down even further to the gentleman's point, which is like, friendly might be more decomposed into, did it use emojis? Did it follow the rules? Did it do, the things we want it to do? And then you're now thinking about this as like discrete kind of pass fail, but it can be multiple labels. It doesn't have to be just 1 or 2. It can be a range of labels. You don't want to use numbers because LLMs don't really understand numbers as well as labels and there's some of this has to do with like model training, which is numbers are like, they don't make up like a full token, oftentimes like 1 to 10. So that's why words are actually like kind of stored in the model's memory better.
Would it work if you had like a rubric where it's like 5 points if you use an emoji, another 5 points if you use this, and then kind of like adds up to something out of 100?
So I would urge you to like actually think about it the other way around, which is what if you have categories you care about, like use emoji, uses this tone, and then you convert those into scores from labels to scores, not the other way.
Right, so just like split.
Exactly. So it's kind of a combination of what we were talking about before, which is there's multiple dimensions to the email, and you can assign a score of like use emoji 5 points as a conversion from a label to a score, but you don't want to use the LLM to create a score in the first place. Kind of come at it the other way. And we can share some more. It's a really good question because like I wish it worked that way. It just doesn't, and we can share research that we've done to actually prove that. Actually, Shri in the back there in the green shirt. Sorry to put you on the spot, Shri. She did some research on this recently, so you can ask her about that too.
Yeah. Is there do you have a benchmark or a guidance in terms of how much the cost of the evals, especially on a continuous basis, versus the actual product itself? The cost, because LLMs and judges can be very expensive, actually.
It's, this is the interesting part of this, which is like, there's the cost of the judge, but I actually think like LLMs are relatively cheap compared to human labelers, right? They're like, if you wanted a human label data set, the same data set, it would cost you probably 1,000 times more, if not more, right? Tokens are relatively cheap. High quality tokens are still relatively cheap compared to human judgment. For example, like Claude Code, if we're using Claude Code, it generates whole code bases for like $1, Like, so LLM labels are like pretty small paragraphs and labels, but it's a really good question because I think about costs on another dimension, which is time. And we get asked a lot, like, how much time should we spend evaluating our data? Like, I just want to get this thing out there. Why is this taking me even more time than building the agent in the first place? And it's a valid question. But I think that the reality is that prototypes are really easy and getting to production is hard. And in the last year, we've seen a lot of companies build prototypes that are really fast and impressive, but when you actually want to ship, they don't work because you didn't actually do the work of like testing and evaluating the outputs of the system in the first place. So the inverse question I'll ask a little bit is, how much value do you think this system will have or an AI product will have in your company? And are you allocating that kind of representative amount of time to evaluations to make sure it actually does the thing it's supposed to do? So let me kind of make it a little bit less like abstract, which is if you're building a data set for healthcare, for labeling, generating like diagnostics for a doctor, that's probably something that you should price pretty high and not try to be like, we're going to make this thing like $5, per month or something like that. Like if you're generating a high quality data set, you should make sure that you're pricing your agent so that it actually covers the cost of the work that goes into creating a high quality output. And that's because you just can't get stuff for free in the AI world. Like things don't work out of the box. You have to get the right data in place to make sure that they work. And that is also why the foundation labs are raising so much money. It's so that they can create more data sets, not just for training, but for evaluations in the first place. So that's the way I look at it, which is like, it kind of is an expensive process. Most people don't realize that, but that's actually part of the development, the life cycle of the AI system. Really good question.
And who do you think is the best person in the team to buy the Eagles? From listening to your presentation, I was thinking, who should be the right person? I know that maybe the PM can do it, or maybe the developers or the designers. But who do you think in the team should be doing the Eagles?
So I actually have a fun whole sort of presentation on a very similar topic, but I'll just kind of give you the short version of it. Let me see if I can pull up the visual though, because it's kind of fun. Sorry. I feel like I'm just coming back to this thing. So I'll kind of give like a quick answer to it, which is I would advocate that the person that is responsible for, at the end of the day, writing the eval is really highly linked to the person that should be labeling the data in the first place. Because think about it from this perspective. If you're a product person and you're thinking, okay, how am I measuring the quality of my agent in the first place? And there's kind of two parts to this, right? There's the prompt and the eval system itself, but then there's the data that you're using to align the eval. And if you aren't working on the prompt, that's, you should be iterating with the engineers on the prompt and on the system itself, but like you can kind of give them direction on like, hey, here's what we care about, here's the evals. But if you aren't in the details on the data, you're actually outsourcing the quality of that data to a completely different part of your business potentially. So what I like to say is like, if you're not actually part of the team that's labeling the data, or at least looking at it or understanding how it's labeled, you're essentially outsourcing the quality of the eval to a different team, and then that is the quality of the product. So the short answer I'll give you is, even if the PM isn't involved in labeling the data themselves, knowing the quality of the data is up to where it should be for engineers to build evals is really, really important. So I think it's actually a joint process is where I kind of land, which is it's some kind of shared function between engineering, QA if you have it, and product. Because that's really how you get the right people in the room aligned on what good looks like.
Yeah, that's what it sounded to me, that it has to be a new way of collaborating, that is not just in the traditional software cycle that you have.
Totally.
And now it has to be a specific thing where everybody or a lot of people are collaborating.
Are looking at the data. And I'll give you another story here from the self-driving days. What we would do is actually once a week, we would just get in a room, like a conference room like this. This is a much nicer conference room than the ones that we would use. But we would get in a room and there'd be like 10 of us, and there would be some driving data on the screen. And we would just look at it and be like, what should the car have done in this case? Should it have made a left turn or not? Did it see the pedestrian? And we're trying to like really get ourselves in the head of like how the system works so that we can figure out what we should have done. And so I think there's some folks that are like, look, just label the data, just get a label out there. Maybe you want to assign someone on your team as like a benevolent dictator. This is like a term that Hamill, who's a friend of ours, actually likes to use. Like just make someone the person who's responsible for labeling the data. I actually take a different approach, which is if you can get 3 people on your team labeling the same row, you have much higher confidence on what the agent should have done or should not have done if you can actually get the agreement between the labelers. Because there's a lot of nuance when there's disagreement. And that's usually when you want to have a debate. It's sort of like when you bring on a new hire to your team, or you're going through the hiring process. If you've been through like a hiring committee, you can say, let's debate the ones where there's like a split judgment a little bit. Like, why did someone say no? Why did someone say yes? And you want to try to get into the details on that a bit.
Yeah, that's exactly the word that was coming to my mind, a committee.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and like I think it's like having some disagreement protocol. Like when there's disagreement, what do we do? Where do we defer? Do we say that that's an example we need to go and look closely at or not? So.
Yeah. Since we're talking about evals through the whole process, do you look at when you give the prototyping example to go to production, do you generally recommend or see users create benchmark evals once they're in production to make sure there's no regression, or is it the exact same development evals or use case by use case?
Yeah, I think it is use case by use case. So you can use the same offline evals for online as well, and that is what we actually help you build those data sets right from offline to online. So when you're making those changes in production, you can measure the performance. But there's kind of 2 things that change. One is you'll want to keep adding to those data sets. So there's kind of, actually let me back up a little bit. When you're building data sets, there's a few different reasons why you might build a data set. You can build a data set to say, okay, this is representative of all of the data I'm going to see. Like it's like 100 rows of like random data that we want to use based on, just to make sure that the agent performs well in most scenarios. That's like your, sort of like, and some teams call it like a golden data set of like 100 rows or something like that. But you might also have specific failure modes that you want to build data sets for. So in the self-driving world, we would say, okay, the car is driving straight. Let's have a data set for like, overall driving data. But when we want to have more crazy scenarios where like, the car is making a left-hand turn and there's a pedestrian in the sidewalk, that would be a specific data set that we would build. And the reason that you have specific data sets is for 2 purposes. One is if to make sure that when you push changes onto the car, you're not regressing, but also that you know that you can improve on a specific scenario. So to bring it back to your point, which is like, is this the same data set or not? It kind of depends because you want to keep adding to this data set with real world data. So it's kind of a living, breathing kind of thing that you're making changes to. And then sometimes you want to create specific data sets for specific failure modes. So. Yeah, and then we'll go first to you and then to the person.
How do you deal with the unknown unknowns? Because it seems like you can only evaluate what you think might happen or what might go wrong, right?
So I see. So this is a little bit of, if I could try to reinterpret the question, you tell me if I got this right, which is like, how do I catch new failure modes is another way to think about this, right? So that's a really good question because that's actually where I think that it's a little bit of like, when I come back to the requirements funnel, if you think about like what good means at the very top, as you go through this process, you might find that there's reasons why you got a frustrated user or a session that you didn't, was bad for some reason, but you doesn't fall into one of these neat categories. And that's an opportunity to go and say, oh, we need to call this a new failure mode. So like it was a bad session, bad user interaction, but we didn't anticipate it, so this is a new category. But as long as you think about this systematically and drill in deeper and deeper into your system, that's how you can find new failure modes, basically. Yeah. And sorry, there was another question.
Yeah, so thus far we have been seeing that we're doing some kind of a red and green signaling, right? Which is 10% users have been frustrated out of 100 or 200 responses for the day or something like that. So now if I want to go down and pinpoint why, what was causing those bad recommendations, or how can how do I get to, remember when you did that visualization, like the different steps, different tools and then a summarization. So where is the problem? How can I get to that?
Yeah, so I didn't go into too much depth on that in the system. In Arize, but that's where you can build dashboards for different failure modes. So you can actually think about this literally as a funnel, which is there's kind of two levels. One is in the trace itself, you can see different failures in a trace to pinpoint, oh, this is what this eval says, like this is where the problem is in the trace. So you can see within a single example, what are the failures that are popping up. You can also look at this at aggregate, which is across the path of the agent that the agent is taking. I'll try to zoom out here a little bit. And you can see, if you have evals on different steps in your system, you can actually catch exactly what the rate is at different parts of your system where users are getting frustrated or not. So you really want to use evals both to drill into a specific trace and see pinpoint the failure modes like you're saying, or at aggregate for all of our sessions, where in the agent's process are we seeing the worst eval performance? Does that make sense? Yeah, so you need kind of both views, a single trace view and an aggregate view for evals in your system.
Do you do something for multi-agent orchestration as well, where at a system level I can look at, so let's say I have different traces for different agents, right? And then at the aggregate level, I can see which agents have what failure modes, and then go around as a platform.
Yeah, so that's actually kind of what this is, actually. So this could be, right now it's all LangGraph, but imagine that this is Crew AI, this is LangGraph, this is custom. And you can have evals on each of these steps. So you can have the same eval kind of orchestrated out to multiple agents and seeing which agent is performing the task the best and just pick the one that's doing the best, right? So that's kind of where this is helpful. And that's kind of the reason I kind of show this example as a multi-agent system, because right now it's all going into one agent in the end, but you can imagine that that's 3 different responses and you want to pick the best one as well. Good question. Cool. I want to leave a good amount of time for more questions and just folks networking as well. So let's definitely stay connected. You can find me at amankh.ai. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn or X. There's also a Substack if you want to follow that. It's free. I try to post my workflows there. So whenever I'm really on this kick recently of like personal operating system, like using Claude Code and using like Cursor to help me do my job so that I can be even lazier. But I joke, CEOs in the room. So, but follow along to see like how I use AI, but also how I'm writing evals, how I think about evals. And if you like this and you wanted to bring your team along and you're like, hey, I listened to this guy Aman talk about evals for 2 hours. I think you should come listen to him for 30 minutes. There's a webinar which is we're hosting. It's a virtual webinar in about 2 weeks, I think. Yeah, about 2 weeks time, roughly. Where I'll go through some of these workflows, but actually how PMs and engineers can collaborate on evals. And I'll kind of give a bit of a workshop around that. And I'm hoping to leave some time for questions there as well. So it's just another way to kind of bring your team on board to listen.
Do you have that event already set up where we can take a screenshot of it?
Yeah, that's the QR code. Yeah. So sorry, to make that clear. So the QR code is not for my website. It's for the webinar that we're hosting. So feel free to register for the webinar from the QR code. And if you want to connect with me, it's amankh.ai, and all my links are there as well. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to me talk about observability and evals. Hopefully that was fun, and it was some great questions from the audience. So thank you all for coming out, and thank you to our sponsors and host again. Quick round of applause for ProductTank. They do this. These folks really do this like labor of love to build this community, so please follow along with them. They do an amazing job, trying to get just all of us to think about our craft at a higher level as it's changing. So really admirable work. So thank you guys. Yeah.